Hi everyone, welcome to This Week. My name is Eva. This week happens bi-weekly on Saturdays at 1 p.m. UTC time. We talk about issues ranging from politics to economics and pop culture across the continent of Africa. We welcome you to join the conversation and engage in the chat box on YouTube or on Discord on our website, leadersofafrica.org/live. And remember to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive notification on our live broadcast. Hi guys, good to see you. How are you all doing?
How are you?
Yeah, good to see you too. It's been a long 2 weeks and I'm excited to be back.
Gloria, how's your week been?
Been okay. You know, I have been, I'm studying some statistics and this week has been crazy. Wrapping my head around statistics, but we're having fun. I'm getting there.
I'll send you flowers.
Is this your first time learning statistics?
It's my first time and I keep asking myself, where was I my entire life in all the classes I've been through and all the schooling I did? I've never done anything like that.
Okay, I'll add chocolates to the flowers.
You'll be fine. It's fun. It's fun. Just keep at it. And Gloria, how about you? How's your week been? How's Boston?
I think you meant Violet.
Yeah, Violet, sorry.
Oh, Boston is fine. We had our first snow day yesterday. The snow is still on the ground. So it's quite beautiful.
Oh, man, I missed snow.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, it snowed here the whole of yesterday. Really had.
Oh. Please send me some in the little bag.
Oh, I will.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we here in the Carolinas, we don't really get snow, but it's a little bit chilly this week, but not too bad. So it's fine. How about you, Ghana? How are things going on in East Lansing?
Well, Lansing is what it is. It's, getting cold every now and then. And it's been a very busy week for me in the US and over there in Africa. As you guys are aware, a lot of things are happening at the World Trade Organization that I'm going to be talking about today. And obviously back home in Nigeria, where I refer to as home in the country, Lagos has been burning. It's been a very crazy one over there in the country. There's been a lot of looting. It's been it's been a lot of negative this week. So, yeah, but I'll be glad to talk about the World Trade Organization and a lot of lessons for Africans in the diaspora and Africans at all. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we are going to zoom into the conversation. Today, we are going to talk about range of issues taking place across the continent. So we'll begin with you, Ghana. What's on your mind on issues on the continent?
It's been a lot, just like I mentioned, the issue of NSAS in Nigeria is one of the topmost ones on my mind. And the issue of the World Trade Organization is the most important one on my mind. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. A lot of people have been concerned seriously about issues around the directorship of World Trade Organization because it's never been this competitive. We have brilliant folks from different parts of the world, who submitted application to become director of the World Trade Organization. But interestingly, there has been a particular candidate that attracted a lot of controversies, even from within Nigeria and outside of Nigeria. And she got a lot of support from the Nigerian government, who pushed assiduously for the emergence of her candidature as the first female and African leader of the World Trade Organization. And her name is Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. She describes herself, I describe her as a Nigerian because she was born in the country. And she trained as an economist here at Harvard in the United States. And she also completed her PhD at MIT. She was a two-time minister in the country, Minister of Finance in the country, which is something very difficult to do. She worked with President Olusegun Obasanjo as the Minister of Finance. And she later came back during the era of Jonathan Goodluck, Ebele Goodluck. She also worked as a minister during the time of Jonathan Goodluck. So she currently sits on many boards, including the boards of Standard Chartered Bank, the boards of Twitter, the board of Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, and the board of Africa Risk Capacity. So she has this very intimidating credential. And Okonjo is somebody that I've met. I mean, she's a very interesting character, intellectually alert, and she's very, very passionate about things Africa. And she has a way of pushing things through. Yeah,
she obviously sounds very, very equipped and prepared for the work that she was chosen for. I'm just curious, what is the U.S. Reason for blocking her candidacy?
Yeah, I'm interested to know as well.
Because, the path to breaking the glass ceiling by Iweala and Ngozi was a very tough one. Even she had some challenges from within Nigeria. She felt some people never wanted her to become the director of the World Trade Organization. Eventually, she made it through. And so in 2019, I think she had a premonition the United States might not want to support a candidature. So she went for the citizenship of the United States of America, and she was granted the citizenship of the country in 2019 because I felt she had the premonition that with the citizenship, she would be in a better position. She's going to get support from the United States. Unfortunately, because when she filled the form, she said she's an American. African American, Nigerian American to be precise. So hoping that our citizenship of the United States was going to be a big one for the US to support
that's quite interesting because
this is an American citizen that has emerged as the director of the World Trade Organization. No matter how they want to characterize her, she has dual citizenship, American citizenship and the Nigerian citizenship. So she felt that was going to be a plus. But unfortunately, folks in the Trump administration, they looked the other way around. They have never even described her as an American. They said an economist.
I have a question. I know right now the current climate in the United States is very anti-immigrant and very anti-people of color, especially coming from the administration. But do you think that if we were under a completely different administration, there would have been nothing with her candidacy and it's just a special case of it being a Trumpian presidency?
No, I think the thing to me is this. And that's the message for people from Africa, for all of us. It's about the strategic relations of the United States. It's about the strategic interests of the United States. So when the Trump administration explained their decision for somebody else, they felt there are strategic issues of importance to them and to the whole world in the areas of trade. That they are so much critical about in terms of the person that represents them at the table. And they don't see an Okonjo-Iweala doing that representation for them. You may want to recall, there was an issue with the emergence of Dr. Adishina Adewumi as the head of the African Development Bank. There was a petition that was supported by the United States because the U.S. worked assiduously to make sure that it never emerged. And their major reason is that, aside the issue of alleged financial misappropriation, their issue was that it's been making decisions that were not in the best interest of the United States. So I felt the U.S. felt Okonjo-Iweala was not going to be making decisions as the director of the World Trade Organization that is the best in the United States. And what this is telling us is this: wherever you come from, you pick up the American citizenship, it doesn't matter to them. It's about diaspora.
Well, Ghana, if I may say something, I see what you're saying, that, okay, maybe no matter where you come from, it doesn't matter. You still have to bow to U.S. interests and maybe pick up citizenship to legitimize your candidature for anything or yourself. But I find it quite disturbing that it's 2020 and we still have to, go through all those hoops because just being qualified is not enough. Because I don't know. At first glance, I was going to say, is it because she's a woman? and there's,
All right.
all these gender dynamics. But if she has all those qualifications, and then, because when you mentioned that she had to come and pick up US citizenship because, she had the premonition that the US wouldn't endorse her candidature, that really bothers me because I remember reading the story.
Let me jump in on that point. It sounds like it's not necessarily, it sounds like the American citizenship part was a really sort of strategic part on her side, right? To be able to perhaps legitimize herself in the name of the administration. But she's certainly somebody who has been very clear that she is representing sort of the interests of the global South, right? In that context, right? Even if she does have American citizenship. But I want to come back to, in addition to that, come back to something you said, Violet, which I think is right. The current president of the United States views things through a very clearly racial lens, and powerful people of color are threatening, right? Women and also powerful people of color are inherently threatening to the United States. So we have to know that that's going to play sort of a role here, right? The second thing that is sort of we're discussing or kind of dancing around a little bit is the fact that international institutions are not equitable, and they're not designed to be equitable, right? So that certain countries play a substantial role in the context of these organizations, right? We wouldn't be having this conversation right now on This Week if there were different ways that we vote for candidates, right? Because, she's got a broad amount of support, not just in African countries, but also globally. The European Union countries and the EU has embraced her candidacy, right? So it's not like she's sort of, going at it alone, or she's like Africa's candidate or anything of that nature, although many of them see her as their candidate. But she's got broad-based support right now. And in normal circumstances, it would sail through. But the nature of the way that the WTO is set up, but we can also think of other ones such as the IMF or the World Bank, there are certain voting and procedural and institutional barriers there to sort of a consensual vote. Now, some people could argue that's good because you need sort of world power sort of driving the agenda, right? And many people critique the African Union and other sort of, more equitable bodies of not getting things done because they appeal to the least common denominator, right? But at the same time, when we think about the way the world is changing and the increasing multipolarity of the world, we have to think about issues of reform in these institutions and understanding that some of the biggest economies are moving through, are going to need that say, or going to have to drive that agenda, right? One country that should come to mind outside of the African continent is India, right? Where is India in the whole sort of the global mix, right? As being the second most populous country around the world, right? Then we come to obviously the continent, the African continent and Nigeria. So the last thing I want to say about this is it's kind of interesting because it's also a contest against another woman. Ghana, do you want to talk about the other lady that's running there against her?
Wait, let me say something. Let me say something then. So the whole argument from the US is that they call her, she's internationalist, right?
Yes, that's
in the
true.
sense that, she's going to focus on every other country, and also with US having a trade war with China, if I would say, and with her having China backing is also an issue for them, right?
Yes.
So another argument that they made, China support her candidacy, and you also have to remember that the other candidate, the Korean woman, China and Japan do not support her. So the other issue is that the other argument the US raised was that she doesn't have hands-on experience when it comes to international trade. The other woman has it because she has been a Korean foreign trade minister. You get it? So this is a whole lot of things, but I feel like with the person of her capacity and also her qualification, I feel like she's equipped to do the work. It doesn't matter whether she has hands-on experience when it comes to international trade or not. I feel like with the kind of job she has done all over the world, including Nigeria and even here in the US, and also the amount of time she has spent with the World Bank, I think she's equipped to do the job. As Peter is saying, the reason US is blocking her candidacy has to do with the fact that they feel like she supports like the global south and she's an internationalist. And also US is thinking about trade first. So like their trade war with China, they are like, is she going to help us move this in the way that benefits us and things like that. But the other thing you also have to know is the last one, that US is also a major contributor to WTO. So that is why everything is being slowed down, because if US block here, I think all the members will can go ahead and push her nomination through. But you also have to remember that when it comes to the money aspect, US is a major contributor. So they also have to think about all these factors.
I do have a question though. Peter, you mentioned something about because of the way that the current US president, views race relations. I'm curious to know, because the US election is in 3 days. Mm-hmm. Do you think, for example, if Biden won the presidency, that lady would stand a chance? Because then if it is true that it is because of, the racial perspective of the current president, assuming we got a different president, after the election, then that shouldn't be an issue unless it's an underlying institutional issue. Because when I read the story, apparently when the WTO votes, it's a consensus vote. Everyone has to say yes. And apparently everyone had said yes, but the United States. And then they went ahead to write a letter endorsing the South Korean candidate. And so I'm just asking, Peter, what do you think? Is it an executive thing, or is it an institutional thing? Meaning that no matter who wins the US presidency, it's still going to remain like the official position of the United States?
I think it's hard to tell. It's possible that a President Biden, and we'll see in a few days, would sort of be open to this being a step towards reconciliation, knowing that she's got a broad-based amount of support, particularly amongst U.S. allies, right? So they can be able to say, look, we're re-engaging in this position. And I think the other issue we have to keep in mind is that the head of the WTO is not the WTO, right? It's an organization that functions between states, that has arbitration mechanisms, right? The head is not the deciding the course of the WTO. The members exercise that power. So arguably you could say, well, this is less of a substantive move than sort of a message that is being sent. And perhaps President Biden, for example, wouldn't be interested in spending sort of international capital on that fight. I want to show a couple tweets before we move on from her account. She's in this tweet. This is just coming from a couple days ago. She's happy for the success and continued progress of her bid. She's very humbled for the amount of support, and the process continues on. So it's referring here to November 9th, because there is sort of the next stage of the process of the WTO. She's also grateful for her international support by some people that should be very familiar to us, like Aliko Dangote has provided support, as well as a number of others. So again, she's getting that broad-based support in the sort of international community, both in Western countries and in Nigeria and on the continent of Africa as well.
Ghana,
maybe just the last
something. Wait, let Ghana
maybe
speak.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So what I was going to talk about, the whole issue is this. I think it's about strategic interest. No matter who the American president is, American strategic interest internationally remains the same, either a Republican or a Democrat. And that I've seen as the number one priority interest in their decision-making and international policy relationship. There are a lot of outstanding issues that America is trying to address under the current administration. One of these is its trade relation with China and a couple of other international actors. And when you look at their rejection of the candidature of Okonjo-Iweala, it's based solely on this, not because she's a lady or because she's an African American or whatever the way you want to describe her. It's just because they felt that it's about their strategic interest. It's about those that are supporting her. China, Japan. America is very critical about what that actually means for the continued dominance of the United States over world affairs, particularly in the aspect of trade. I think that is one thing that actually came across to me, because when I read the reasons why the United States rejected a candidature, it was said that the WTO is, and now I'm quoting them verbatim, is badly in need of major reform. It must be led by someone with real hands-on experience in the field. And when you look at the credential of our counterpart from South Korea, Minister Yo, she is a trade expert. And when you compare that with Okonjo-Iweala, she's not a trade expert, in fairness to the other candidate. And that means all along, the U.S. knew what their position was going to be, that they needed a very strong ally, somebody from a country that they feel that, oh, this is a very strong ally that will continue to push for their interests. And here I'm going to disagree with Peter, that the WTO directorship doesn't matter. It has a lot of leverages on what goes on within the affairs of the WTO. Because when you say it doesn't have that leverage, it just means that we are looking at somebody that is just there for being their sake. I don't want to agree with this framing, Peter. I do believe that the director of the WTO has a strong influence on issues that happen in WTO. Of course, the superpower will continue to have stronger leverage on the whole system, the dynamics of issue over there. But to me, it's about the strategic interest. I believe that the U.S., they've assessed the situation, and the fact she is not in the best, she doesn't fit into their strategic calculation.
Yeah. I think I tend to agree with Ghana on that one, especially if you look at how this current administration has behaved towards international institutions. The current administration is on the way of pulling out of WHO, came out of the Paris Agreement a while back. Look at how they talk about NATO. So, I mean, this has been a consistent pattern with the current administration. We know that the ideology of the current administration is America first. They could really care less about this international organization unless this person and this international organization is going to work for America. And some of the complaints that they had for the Paris Agreement, America is spending more money than others. We're sending money to free country. And the way that the lady we're talking about is representing the South, for them, she will be advancing the interest of the South. She's a Black woman from Africa. And so I really, really think this is about a strategic position, as Ghana is saying.
Well, you know, the positive about it is this, and I love this. Africa demonstrated it during the time of Dr. Additional Adewumi, when he contested for the chairmanship of African Development Bank. Nigeria stood her ground and said, no, we are in support of Adewumi, no matter what it was going to. And this is telling me that Africa is beginning to exert influence, standing their ground, regardless of who is opposing their interest in the international arena. Just when this issue happened, the president of the country, President Muhammadu Buhari, he rallied his colleague on the African continent. He spoke with all those international, allies that are supporting the candidature of Okonjo-Iweala, and even went ahead to speak with the United States representative of the United States of America on this issue. And that is telling me that Africa is beginning to understand that even if the U.S. is saying no to them, they can't stand their ground and say, this is where our interest lies, and this is what our position is. And I think this is a very positive one for Africa as a whole. But there's an important point we need to understand. If the United States of America is pushing for democracy, honestly, I think the principles of democracy should be allowed to prevail on the voting pattern at the WTO. But because these organizations are not designed to serve the interests of the South, they are designed to serve the interests of the superpower. And that was why Ab initio, they came up with a voting system that preempted some of the outcomes of the voting outcomes, and that also preempted how they can neutralize the outcome of such a voting pattern if it is not in their best interest. And that was why Ab initio, They went for this arrangement of a consensus, meaning that if one single member, particularly from the powerful bloc, says no to a particular candidate, that is not going to be. That is going to force them through a process of negotiation and when it comes to negotiation, grants will be shifted. Trades off will come into play. And that will mean that Okonjo-Iweala may have to tell the United States of America, I'm going to commit to this in the best of your interest. I'm going to commit to that in the best of your interest. And at the end of the day, the South might be compromised. That is one thing we really need to understand about the whole process, what it means for the South in the long term. Because I believe that the US might eventually say, okay, let her be. But that won't be without major concession that you may not be aware of, that I may not be aware of, that Auntie Ngozi might not speak to in the public gear. And these are some of the concerns to me going forward on this issue of
Ghana, I
So
believe that at the end of the
colonization is
day,
alive and well.
I believe that since she has the support of major international actors like European Union and people from the continent, I feel like she will go through despite the pressure from the United States. At the end of the day, she's not there to serve just the US. She has to serve the interests of all the international actors. All right. So there is so much to talk about on WTO, but we have to move on to something else because there's so much going on in our world today. So, Violet, what is on your mind?
Hopefully hopefully, Violet, something a little bit lighter than our international institutions conversation. I hope.
I know. This is really dark and depressing. But yeah, well, I have something that probably is light, but still reminiscent of, dark times. I don't know, has anyone heard of comic relief? Not comic relief as in comic relief.
I've heard of it. Relief. There was a show on TV called The Office. It was a British show about a boss from hell. And the boss from hell, comes into the office one day and says, I'm raising money for comic relief, and is wearing, a red nose, because I think it's also called Red Nose Day, right? And he's raising money. And me coming from the US, I had no idea what that was. And then I found out it's some big charity thing. So I've heard of it.
You're right on the money, Peter.
I've never heard of comic relief, guys.
Honestly, my
okay, so let me tell you about comic relief.
Give us some comic relief then.
Peter is right on the money. So comic relief is this big charity organization in the UK. And just like Peter said in the office, there was this, whole Red Nose affair. Well, they are very famous for having that fundraising, the Red Nose fundraising event. And as part of that, they do typically tend to send global stars like Ed Sheeran and other celebrities, to the African continent to fundraise, and typically when they are fundraising, it's their usual model that we're used to, where they show all these starving kids with flies and desperation and poverty, thank you very much. So actually in 2017, when Ed Sheeran went to Liberia, he found two boys who were sleeping on a boat by the beach, and he apparently paid for them, to go to a hotel and so they could sleep well. But, he was bashed because, it promoted this whole picture of white saviors. Yeah. And so that Red Nose Day fundraising event has been bashed. There's been a lot of growing criticism, and people are saying, no, they literally need to stop doing this because, I quote, the charity has successfully promoted, this image of Africa as one homogeneous blob of pain, suffering, and starvation. It actually does remind me of the debate. You remember when that strange fly came and settled on Mike Pence's head? So a friend of mine texted me and said, oh, there's the UNICEF fly on Mike Pence. And I was laughing, but I couldn't help but think about the irony, as much as it was, sad, the UNICEF fly is finally on Mike Pence, because for every one of those adverts, there's usually a fly and some child has a running nose and they're looking diseased. And, so basically they're saying that they are promoting this very disparaging image of the African continent. Africa is making progress. They need to tell, stories of thriving. Fine, there's a lot of poverty and inequality, but there are also lots of stories of, actually, we have so much more progress, compared to the past. And so apparently they are going to shift to telling more positive stories. And this time they are going to use local filmmakers and local people who deal in art to tell stories. And I mean, this almost links back to what Ghana was talking about, strategic interests and who are the powers that be. Because, I mean, we need to stop, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but we need to tell our own stories and stop letting other people tell our stories for us, especially our colonial masters, our former colonial masters, even though one could, logically argue that colonialism is still alive and well. So yeah, that's what happened about the comic relief. I'm glad that they slash, but
I mean, Violet,
Gloria, what you saying?
No, the thing to me is this. Is there no poverty in the UK? Why send celebrities to Africa? Why not send the celebrities to film homeless people in the UK? Why
that's an interesting thing.
To film those in poverty in Russia? Why not send celebrity to film those people that are in poverty elsewhere in the countries that are categorized as developed world? In the US, there are core issues of poverty. Homeless people, even in DC.
Absolutely.
I want to know somebody like me. Is when they go from the UK to Africa and all they focus on is on poverty. They film people that are vulnerable without their consent. They raise money to raise their own profile, not to solve the problem of poverty. I believe this is making Africa to be looked down upon as a continent of, that is a burden to the world. It's not projecting Africa positively.
But in all fairness, I would say that in the UK, they do spend a lot of time talking about homelessness in the UK. There is sort of a discourse about homelessness. I don't know how many of you have spent some time in the UK. I spent a year there, living there, and they have something called the Big Issue, which is something that homeless people are able to sell, or people that give small donations. Each of them also have a program that gives homeless people dogs as well, and sort of things of this nature. So there is a sort of a homelessness issue and discourse in the UK, I will say.
No, Peter,
but you have to understand that, wait, I'm coming. You have to understand that even though they talk about homelessness in the UK, what is the projection of the UK to the world? The projection of the UK to the world is developed, brightness, there's no darkness, nobody is starving. That is the projection of the UK and America to the whole world. When I came to the US, I was surprised that there was a man standing by the road. When I saw him first, he was like, "Help me! I need $1. I'm homeless." And I was like, "What is going on here?" Because I never knew there was issue of homelessness here. I didn't know people didn't even have homes. Then we happened to go to Chicago, and I saw so many people sleeping by the street. And I was amazed. So it has to do with the projection, how they project their country to other places. They will never project Los Angeles, where they have this big homeless shelter there with like a whole field with people sleeping in the field. They will never project that to the world.
But
so
nobody would.
That is why.
But I think that's something that's universal. Nobody projects out the sort of the downside image of their country.
The thing is that
people asked me how I was going to spend my summer. I asked them first. I said, "Where were you going to spend your summer?" He said he was going to Uganda to go and help people solve the problem of poverty. Then somebody said, "Oh, he was going to go to Kenya to go and help solve the problem of poverty." Then everybody was mentioning Africa, poverty. They said, "Ghana, what about you?" I said, "I'll be going to, poor areas in Iowa to help solve the problem of poverty in the US. And everybody was like, what do you mean? I said, that was how I felt when you said you want to solve the problem of poverty in Africa. I would love that you solve the problem of poverty here first, because there are also problems of poverty. If you said, oh, I want to go and strengthen the educational system in Africa, learn something from them because they're doing something positive, that is welcoming. It's not just about negative. And that was the point I mentioned to them in that sociology class when it came up. And I mentioned this, everybody was like, oh, they never thought about this. I said, it is high time we started thinking about those issues. It's not about, and that is where the issue of everything comes in.
For the first time, Comic Relief did spend £6 million to address racial inequality in the UK, especially with regard to the whole COVID-19 situation. And they're trying to highlight how, it's the pandemic is disproportionately affecting Black and other minority groups in the UK. So it is a first, and maybe that is one of the good things that are coming out of the criticism that they're facing. Well, the next Dreadnought Day is in March 2021, and we are waiting to see if there'll be any significant changes. But for now, we know that there's going to be, again, white celebrities introducing local filmmakers and urging people to support them. And in my head, I'm like, so basically, a white person has to give legitimacy to a Black person for the world to listen to them and pay attention enough to give money. I don't know, but I still have a problem with it. It still reminds me of why Ngozi had to come and seek US citizenship to gain legitimacy. It does not sit right with my soul.
It's about acceptance.
Just a second. I wanted to say that what I saw is that Comic Relief decided to, of course, change their strategy. They won't be sending white saviors to Africa anymore, but they decided that they're going to start highlighting their stories of success on the ground. It remains to be seen how they're going to do it. Let's say, are they going to be sending filmmakers still to support? I don't know. But I think it's a good start, but it's long overdue. It's 2020. We can't be doing this thing till today. I've spent a couple months in DC with some international development company. I wasn't there too long, but some already moved past this white savior type of thing, strategy. And I was very grateful actually to see how some minds have shifted when it comes to development. We are not quite there, but I think in America, a good number of international development companies, they're moving in the right direction, not going out and saying we are not the savior, we are not the ones who are going to solve all of your problems, but to sort of give people agency, meet them where they are, get them involved in the process, ask questions, find out what they want, and then just be the middle person between people who need help and the resources that are available in other countries. So I just think that is so long overdue. But again, let's see what they do in their next.
It's so interesting because, one of the things that I found interesting about this story is, and it's been mentioned, is that it said it was emphasizing that they were moving away from the white savior complex. So it was using that term in all of the sort of the print media as well as the international media with this story coming out. So I think it was interesting how that's how they characterized the problem and sort of, and I think that grows out of what you mentioned, Gloria, is a broader discussion about this concern, right? And the language around the sort of the white savior complex element has grown up over time. I also want to just highlight, lastly, I know, Eva, you want to move on to the next subject, but I think one of the things to point out here is that a lot of international organizations are moving in that direction already, right? And I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that what we see on Facebook and Twitter with people personally going to countries, creating their own NGOs, doing those typical thoughts may not be representative completely of what the development industry is all about, right? And who's sort of plugged into it. And oftentimes we have to be careful to conflate the two. Now, as you mentioned, Gloria, it's not perfect today, right? Even big, development organizations have their concerns, but it sounds like from what you've suggested, Gloria, things are moving perhaps in the right direction, and this is perhaps a positive step. But again, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens
And
moving
also,
forward.
I want to add a final comment on that. Why did Comet Relief decided to change the narrative in 2020? It's because of the shift that is taking place. Black Lives Matter movement, all the protests going on
Probably.
to stop all this racial bias. That is why they decided to change the narrative. If it hadn't been that, because in is it 2017, 2015, when they sent all the celebrities there, people were talking about it. They decided not to do anything. It's because we are in 2020 and people have realized that Black people are suffering, not just in the US, but all over the world. And even the narration they give about Africa is so dark. So that is why they want to change it. So I think that the best thing for us on the continent is to own our own story, to tell our own story. Because if we do not tell our story, someone will tell it for us. You get it? Exactly. So it's up to us to own the narration about how we want people to talk about us. And also, I also see a lot of Africans. I speak to them when they come here. They are also projecting the same negative image of their own country, talking about negative stuff. Why don't we move on to the small good things that we've done and also move away from talking about all the negatives? Yeah, there are problems everywhere. US have a lot of problems. When you meet American is not going to talk about the homelessness situation in Chicago or in Los Angeles. They're going to talk about the positive things they are doing. So it's up to us.
I think it always depends on who you talk to, though. I think one of the things that you realize about this election that's coming up in 3 days is there are two different views of the United States. Right. One that is going to present that sort of positive, everything's perfect, and another sort of segment that says we've had a lot of issues. The other side says, well, you're underselling the United States or you don't like America. That grows out of a group and a segment and a movement in the United States that is very critical of what is going on in the US. So we can't undermine the fact that there are differences of opinions on this. But Eva, I know you wanted to move on.
What I'm saying is that from the perspective of Africans, we need to own our story. We need to tell our story the way it is. There are a lot of innovation stuff taking place on the continent. We need to talk about those things and also move away from we always being the biggest. It's time for us to give. You get it? And we can do it.
Thank you so much for that.
It's always been given. Sometimes by force. Actually, most of the time by force.
Yeah. And here, we need to talk to the NGOs in Africa. That was a very brilliant point, Eva. The NGOs in Africa, when they go seek for funds in the US or elsewhere in the world, they project this image of poverty. It's all about narrative of poverty. It is high time they shifted away from this. It's not portraying us positively. It's not making us to get the respect we deserve all over the world. Wonderful things are happening in Africa. People are solving their problems without looking for money from elsewhere. And guess what? Majority of this international development organization, a lot of the money goes into the payment of the salaries of their staff.
Ghana, that's what I was going to mention. When they're on that continent, different power.
So that people know what they're actually doing. Are they using the poverty in Africa? Let's just move on to the next thing, Eva. I think it's a very interesting. Move on, please.
Yeah, we could talk all day. We could talk all day about this. About
right,
this.
So,
this is one comment I wanted to say. The development box is big. We shouldn't even go there because we'll be here all day. I just wanted to make a comment about storytelling, the narrative. I do believe that a lot of Africans are changing that. There's so many people who have running publications and publishing positive stories about Africa, but the reality remains is that people in the West have stronger media houses, bigger productions, bigger platforms. It will still take us time before we can dominate with our narrative.
Sure. All right. Thank you, everyone. That was a good comment there, Gloria. So let's move on to Tanzania. Peter, what is going on in Tanzania?
Yeah, well, they've had an election this past week. There have actually been two countries that have had elections in the past couple of weeks. One is Tanzania and the other is Seychelles. But Tanzania is obviously really important election. I find it really interesting that a lot of the articles that were written about the election said things like, and this comes from the Washington Post, a publication in the United States, said Tanzania's democracy faces a critical test in Wednesday's election. And then in the New York Times, as Tanzania votes, many see democracy itself on the ballot, right? So sounds like this election is all about the stakes for democracy. And I'm going to argue that I don't think democracy was really on the ballot. I don't think that was at issue to begin with, given, sort of the history of Tanzania and its approach and its perhaps skepticism of democracy in some ways, but I'll come to that in a moment. So the election pitted two candidates, one which many of you may have heard of, which is the current president, John Magufuli of the ruling party, the CCM party, against an opposition figure, and there were other opposition figures. In fact, there were over 10 people on the ballot, but the main opposition figure was Tundu Lissu of the Chadema party. And he actually came back to the country just a couple months ago after being outside of the country in self-exile after a purported assassination attempt. So he was outside of the country for 3 years. He came back a couple of weeks or a couple of months, not a couple of weeks, couple of months before the election, sometime in June, July, somewhere around there. And so he comes back to the country to lead the opposition, right? And the elections were on Wednesday, and the results came out pretty quickly. We know some elections that take place where we have to wait a few weeks, even longer to hear election results. So the election results came out pretty quickly from their election commission, which is called the NEC, National Electoral Commission. And they said that John Magufuli, the incumbent, got 84% of the vote. And Tundu Lissu, who is the leading opposition candidate, got 13% of the vote. In other words, an overall rout, right? But there were a lot of concerns that were mentioned about the process, right? And there have been concerns in Tanzania because Tanzania is a country that has not seen any opposition party take power, right? And so one of the things that we think about whether a country is democratic or not is whether there is the possibility for an opposition taking power. So perhaps we could say, Tanzania is not yet a democracy until we see an alternation of power, that peaceful transfer of power that's so important. We can argue that. But coming back to this issue of the election and this calls that, there were problems, there is some evidence that the president is quite popular in Tanzania. So 64% of Tanzanians, according to Afrobarometer Round 7 data, say they trust the president a lot. 11% say somewhat. So that's a high level of trust, right? So, he has a broad base of trust. And when we look at improvement and the issues of, presidential approval rating, 51% strongly approve the president. Again, according to Afrobarometer Round 7 data, 34% approve. So he has also high levels of approval, right? So maybe there were concerns with the process, but we also have to take into account that the data suggests, the most recent data that's been posted on the Afrobarometer website from Round 7 suggests that he has a fair amount of popularity in the country. But it begs this question, even if you have a lot of popularity, how are you running your elections?
Yeah.
I feel like I've watched this movie.
Were there major concern about the election in terms of the credibility? Was there any wriggling of votes? Because you should understand that, I think yesterday I read on BBC that in terms of the parliamentary seat, Magafuli's party has majority of the seat, about 90-something%, really the highest that I've even heard about in any election. So was there any concerns about the election in terms of voter suppression and fraud and anything? Was there anything like that?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think I'm not so sure about the election day related concerns, although there are significant concerns from election experts as well as election observers about the electoral process. But sometimes it's hard to quantify that. But I think one thing that Tanzanians are saying, coming back to the Afrobarometer survey, is that on that round 7 survey, 34% say the opposition has less freedom in the country, and 23% say they have somewhat less free, they're less free in the country. So even the citizens, even with the broad-based support, suggest the opposition party has less freedom to act and behave. And actually, before the election, for about a week's time, the Election Commission suspended the opposition's campaign because he was making statements about the quality of the electoral process. So they suspended his campaign. So the election rigging, ballot stuffing, these kind of things aside, right? Election day things aside, there are systematic problems with the level playing field in Tanzania. And it's been like that for years because, in all fairness to the sort of Tanzanian leadership, they don't necessarily support an open competitive process, right? And some political leaders, if you talk to them, they're very clear about that, right? They're very skeptical of sort of multi-party competition in the country. And even if we look back to Julius Nyerere, he embraced competition, but in the party rather than, across different parties. So you have to keep in mind that history there, and it feeds into the campaign process. So I don't know what the specific manipulations are, but that's what I'll say.
I do have a question almost in relation to what Eva was asking about, if there's been, any issues to do with voter suppression and the whole electoral process. So I remember reading somewhere that they switched off the internet and social media. And I'm wondering, how would you speak to that? Because in my mind, in a way, that is voter suppression. That is a way of, cutting off people's agency and making sure they cannot communicate, because once you turn the internet off, then nobody knows what's happening and they can't communicate and they can't even corroborate the votes, because as different polling stations are making announcements, everyone is just blacked out. Wouldn't you think that that's sort of like tantamount to voter suppression or something? Yeah, well, at least it's in my head.
It may be slightly different than it could relate to voter suppression, a tactic, but I think it's a symptom of the unleveling of the playing field, right? It's making things unfair. It's yet another thing. I'm glad you raised that, because that's right. They did have internet shutdowns, or what they were also calling slowdowns. So they'll slow the internet down. They'll influence not only the internet, but they were also influencing, it seems, SMS messaging as well in the country. And a lot of experts were very frustrated because one of the biggest companies in Tanzania is Vodafone, which is a UK-based company. And some critics, including some democracy experts and activists, have criticized the UK company for being complacent and complicit with them slowing down the internet. So I think it raises this larger problem about like slowing down of internet, but what is the power of the companies, these more global companies, those that may be based outside the country, about sort of bending to the will of the government and power. So it raises these questions as well, and some have raised them.
So Peter, yeah, go ahead, Gloria,
go
please.
Okay, I was saying, for me, my mind is stuck on that survey that you mentioned where 60-something% of the population say they still support the incumbent. I am just curious, I'm just wondering how much people have been conditioned to just accept that presidents would just come and stay in power for as long as they can. I'm just wondering, are they just respond like that because that's what the government is telling them to respond, or there needs to come. I feel like in countries where we've seen change, it's when the people start to realize that we don't want things to be this way, and the fact that we still have that number of people still being okay with that situation is a problem.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, right? It's pretty high level of support.
I don't want us to impose our reading of things on the people of Tanzania. Okay. I think the question we should be asking is, why are they supporting him? If the president is doing the right thing, which they feel is good for their development, I think it might be colonialistic for us to be saying, no, this is the way they should think. I believe they have their own understanding of issues. That possibly fed into where the reasons, maybe that possibly fed into one of the reasons they have a higher approval rating of him. Whatever it is for them, I want to believe Tanzania knows what is best for them, and that we might want to understand better why was it that they actually have a high, rating of the current president. And the other issue is this: if the issue of current rating is disturbing to us, possibly we want to look at the issue of the data of Afrobarometer. And there are some systemic issues with the data coming from Afrobarometer. If there is no systemic issue, maybe we need to have a different and expanded understanding of democracy and what it means for a democracy to work for people. Because many times it appears to me that we have this monolithic understanding about what is good, about when a democracy is working, when a democracy is not working. If you look at the United States now, many people, 99% versus 1%, it's been there forever. And that's a pointer to the fact that democracy is not working in the United States. Because some people will tell you it should be about the dividends of governance. It shouldn't be about we have a very smooth transition along. People will come with different metrics. If the issue of 99% versus 1% is in Africa, maybe the reading of democracy in Africa will be like negative, just like Edward Said would say. So I want to believe that, some of the issues that are happening in the US there for some time is only that they are not that magnified. And we're looking at what is happening in Tanzania now. But on the other side in Tanzania, this is a popular president. But here we know what the ratings looks like. We know what the rating looks like. And we know what people are complaining about and all of those issues.
Ghana, I once brought up that issue, and an American told me, no, America is not a democracy, we're a republic.
And that's true to some degree. Yeah, and in fact, a representative in the U.S. said that the same thing. A senator actually tweeted that line out. I take your point, Ghana. I think on the first point, you're right about how we sort of read the situation in Tanzania. It is quite possible that the president has wide-based support. Right, the Afrobarometer, data suggests that some people have wide-based support for the party. Right. And CCM as a political party and TANU before it has built in sort of systems that would gain it credibility with the people, right? Dating back to the times of Julius Nyerere, right? It has that sense of legitimacy. Now, at the same time, it may give us pause why the government would then want to compete on an unlevel playing field if it thinks it's so popular. So I always like to challenge those leaders who say they're so popular. Don't start your race, 50 meters ahead if you want to prove that you're truly popular, right? Win this thing and win this thing free and fair, right? As much as you can, level the playing field, right? What do you have to be afraid about, right? And I challenge leaders that are in that situation to do that.
Has the playing field always been leveled anywhere, all over the world?
So the thing is, Ghana, about that, that's a good point. We always talk about the difference between incumbency advantage and a fully unlevel playing field. Incumbents always have an advantage. You're right? Unseating a president in power is very hard to do, right? Very few countries, even established democracies, you don't sort of throw the prime minister out right away, right? Or the president out right away. That is true. But when we talk about the unlevel playing field, it's a step above incumbency advantage, right? It's the use and abuse of state resources. It's the limitation of the opposition. It's the shutting down of the internet. Then it takes it to another level. It's not like the incumbent has the advantage to shut down the internet, or should not, right? And so I think that's where we draw the line. On your second point about democracy, I would respectfully dissent on that point. I think we do have a global definition for democracy, right? And so if a country is not democratic, then they are something else, and that's fine. But the only thing I ask of countries around the world, any country around the world, is be truthful about who you are. If you are a personalistic dictatorship, tell us it. Explain, be proud of it. Be proud. Tell us. No one's allowed to run here. We're not going to play the games of pretending to be getting the legitimacy of being a democracy, because everyone wants that legitimacy, but they don't want to abide by that definition. So that's what I'll say. Challenge those leaders, and be truthful to who you are. Tell your own story as a leader.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
The government wants by ourselves is not what they do in democracy, because democracy says it's the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And if people say, no, we don't want it through democracy, we as a set of people, we want a military form of government. Would you accept that as a democracy? I don't want a response now. But I just want us to think about this relative definition of democracy, and we can talk about this in our next section, maybe in the live broadcast or in another segment of the Leaders of Africa.
Okay, guys, thank you. I mean, this is a contentious issue when it comes to discussing who's a democracy and who is not. So all good things definitely must come to an end. We've come to the end of this conversation. Continue to follow us on YouTube, subscribe to get notification on Leaders of Africa live broadcasts, and also some of the interesting things we are doing here. So until then, next time, we'll see you next time. And also remember, in 2 weeks time, we have our usual hangout, and we are going to talk about an important topic. So continue to subscribe, and we'll send you notification about what it's all going to be about. So we hope to see you next time. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.